sharing the truth with you. I just ask that you listen, and I ask that you also give a very warm welcome to Mr. Gary Kaw, the Executive Director of Hope for the World Ministries. If you'd welcome him, please.
Thank you, Stuart. It's good to be back in Seattle. A lot has happened since the last time I was here 4 years ago speaking at Seattle Center. Back then we were talking about things that would probably be happening based upon some of the plans I had seen of organizations involved in the One World movement. Tonight, it's no longer future tense, it's present tense, because some of those things have happened and other things that I was talking about are in motion, and many of you are already aware of that. Tonight's focus is going to be on the environment, because the One World movement is using the environmental area more than any other area right now to try to create the argument that we have to have a world government in order to solve the environmental crisis. They're using every problem in the world that we see as a reason or an excuse for why we have to have world government. And the environment is going to be the main focal point of globalists over the next 4 years. And if I don't convince you about that this evening, you'll become convinced over the next few years as these things begin being implemented. My particular focus this evening is going to have to do with updating people on current developments within the One World movement, providing a brief overview of the activities taking place in the areas of politics, economics, and also New Age spirituality. And I hope that this will lay the groundwork and form the base upon which the other speakers this evening will be able to build, with their main emphasis again being on the environment. I would like to open this evening by reading a passage of Scripture out of 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 8 through 9, and then verses 16 through 18, to put this evening's meeting into perspective. Paul was writing to the church in Corinth, giving them encouragement because of the many obstacles that they were facing there, and I think it applies today to us. He said, We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. Verse 16, Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And I thank the Lord for that scripture, which keeps my focus on the Lord Jesus Christ, who I believe is the only hope for this world. Many of you already are aware of some of my background. You've heard me on some of the talk shows in this area or last time I was here speaking. But for those of you who don't, just a brief review. As Stuart mentioned, I worked for the state of Indiana in the government as international trade specialist back in the 1980s. And through my job and traveling overseas, working extensively with our foreign embassies in the area of trade promotion, I began to find out about this effort that was underway to move us in the direction of world government. Some of these people refer to it as the New World Order. And being the son of European immigrants and a father who fled from the Nazis and communists during World War II, losing everything that he had, and having a mother that grew up under Hitler as a school child and went through very difficult times, and to now hear that these kinds of developments were taking place in this country, I thought, if it's for real, this is something that we all need to take a stand on. And I proceeded to do some research. I realized that it was very real. I began to speak out on these things. After a few months, I was issued an ultimatum to keep quiet or leave. A few weeks later, I submitted my letter of resignation and I left my position with the government. And at that time began more comprehensive and extensive research, which eventually culminated in my book, En Route to Global Occupation, which has been out now for almost 5 years. Since that time, as I have said, a lot of things have happened. The book was largely in future tense. Now we can talk about these developments in the current tense. The WCPA, the World Constitution and Parliament Association, is an organization that I was invited to join. They are one of the organizations at the forefront of this endeavor to bring about a world government. And back in the late 80s, they did set some timetables. They stated that in 5 to 10 years they wanted to go public, which from 1988, 5 to 10 years out, would be 1993 to 1998, and we're right in the middle of that period of time right now. And so I thought it would be wise tonight to see exactly how they're doing on that timetable of going public. So what I'd like to begin with this evening is share with you a number of examples demonstrating to you how this One World New Age movement is already going public right in our midst. They are selectively going public, but they are going public nevertheless. A couple of years ago when I was here, I held up a copy of the World Constitution that the WCPA had pulled together called A Constitution for the Federation of Earth. I think a lot of people wanted to laugh, including myself, because if it wasn't for real, it would be laughable. The name and everything, it sounds like something out of Star Trek, doesn't it? But a lot of progress has been made by this organization and those organizations networking with them. And that's what we're going to take a look at now. This advertisement was placed in at least 12 different magazines that we are aware of by the WCPA beginning in January of 1995. This particular advertisement I pulled out of a supposedly Christian magazine called Sojourners. The article is very blatant. It spells out the details of what the WCPA would like to accomplish. And it states, world government begins with 70% of Earth included. And then they go on to talk about a manifesto. And the manifesto, by the way, has a lot to do with the environment. And they state here, this manifesto shall go into full force and effect upon confirmation at the 4th session of the Provisional World Parliament to convene in June of 1996, which was just a few months ago. We covered that in our last newsletter issue, only to find out a few days later that at the last moment they changed the dates as well as the location from June in Innsbruck, Austria, to late September in Andorra, which is a remote mountainous region between France and Spain. And that was just a few weeks ago that that meeting took place. At the bottom of this advertisement, they boasted about the number of organizations involved in their effort. And they stated, as of January 1995, more than 400 non-governmental organizations in 72 countries, comprising more than 15 million individual members, had joined the Global Ratification and Elections Network to work for ratification and implementation of the Constitution for the Federation of Earth. End quote. Since that time, the number of organizations has gone up to over 600, and they're from over 90 different countries now. No media coverage on this whatsoever. And you need to understand the WCPA is not where the real power is at within the One World movement. Their effort represents an attempt to try to create the impression that this move toward world government is nothing more than a grassroots, we the people, democratic effort. They want to make it look as if it's coming from the bottom up, so that it will appear much less threatening to the average citizen in the United States that will come to the conclusion through this that we, the American people, are really in control of our own destiny with this. And I don't believe that's the case. And as the evening goes on, I believe you will agree with me. Another example of how this effort is going public is through a number of social service organizations that have begun promoting or endorsing the One World movement. Now, I have nothing against Rotary International directly. In fact, I spoke at one of their functions in Indianapolis and received a warm reception. But you do need to be aware, if you are involved in Rotary, that their monthly magazine, The Rotarian, from November 1994, the November 1994 issue, printed this article promoting One World Government. The article is called Towards Global Governance. It's written by a Rotarian from Montreal, Canada, by the name of Ross Smythe. And he comes out and declares his support for world government, and his closing sentence states, individual Rotarians should be more active in promoting the rule of law, not piecemeal, but on a global basis. More than 1 million Rotarians can be at the vanguard as new world citizens who believe that the health of the human race takes priority over nationalism. End quote. And also in the article, he spoke about the Commission on Global Governance and the World Citizens Assembly that has met in New York City. They've met at least 9 times, according to this article, so this is nothing new. But it is in the process of going public, and these people are coming out of the woodwork. So if you are in a social service organization, do not be surprised if some of your leaders begin to endorse this, because there's a lot of pressure being applied on them, coming from a lot of big money floating around out there that is behind this movement. Have any of you heard of Mikhail Gorbachev before? Just kidding, of course all of you have. The Gorbachev Foundation, which Mikhail Gorbachev has created in San Francisco, is very active in the One World movement, and he has become one of the most visible people in the One World movement. In Russia, people would like to run him out of the country when he goes there to visit, but amazingly his popularity rating in the United States is higher than our presidential candidates. It's amazing what a little bit of PR can do. I had the opportunity of hearing Mikhail Gorbachev speak in Indianapolis at Clues Hall, which is on the Butler University campus, just 4 days ago. I received a last-minute invitation from a friend of mine whose sister moves in these circles, and not only did we get seats, but we had VIP seating 9 rows from the front. I was directly in front of him. I was so close I could count the number of red spots on his forehead, and what he had to say will surprise you. But before we go into that, I'm going to lay just a little bit more groundwork. Gorbachev has been very active in the area of the environment. A year ago, he made a statement at the State of the World Forum in San Francisco, which Samantha Smith and some other speakers that will be speaking later on actually attended, and I was able to get some of this documentation that I'm going to share with you from them. At that conference, which was a world government planning session, literally attended by some of the top leaders of the world, Gorbachev stated, quote, "The environmental crisis is the cornerstone of the New World Order." Some of the people who sit on the board of directors of the Gorbachev Foundation that helped to organize the State of the World Forum include former U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz, who is the chairman of the Board of Advisors. His name is actually on the letterhead at the side. Senator Alan Cranston of California, who is the chairman of the Board of Directors. James Garrison, who was one of the leaders of the Esalen Institute in Southern California, a very occultic New Age organization. He is the president of the Gorbachev Foundation. Some of the other people who are on the Board of Advisors include Father Theodore Hesburgh, who for many years was the president of Notre Dame University. John Nesbitt, the well-known futurist who wrote the book Megatrends, and a number of others. Senator Charles Mathias, to name just a few. A few of the people that were present at the conference, I'll just name a few so that you get an idea, an overview, a cross-section of the types of people that were there. And you'll notice a spiritual dimension here beginning to creep into this one world movement. Isabel Allende was one of the people there. She's the author of a book called House of Spirits. Isn't it encouraging to know that people like this are planning the future of the world? Richard Baker, an abbot from the Crestone Mountain Zen Center. Zbigniew Brzezinski and Mario Como, both of whom were disciples, I think it's fair to say, of former French Jesuit priest Teilhard de Chardin, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. This man has been responsible for getting more people messed up. What he has done is put a Christian top-dressing and Christian terminology onto pantheistic and occultic concepts, and a lot of people have bitten into this. And I quote him extensively in my book, The Demonic Roots of Globalism, that quotes some of these people and where they are coming from. George Bush was also present, as was Sonia Gandhi, who was a co-sponsor of the event through the Gandhi Foundation. Thich Nhat Hanh was also there. He is a Vietnamese Buddhist leader who claims that he worships both Jesus Christ and Buddha and has icons of both on his altar back at home. And one of his life goals is to blend Christianity and Buddhism together into a type of world religion. He was handpicked by Mikhail Gorbachev to lead the special meditation ceremony at the State of the World Forum. And this was no little 10-minute ordeal. This was the centerpiece of the entire conference. It lasted for, I believe, close to half a day. So you need to realize there is a spiritual dimension underlying all of this. It's not just about politics and economics. There is another motivation behind it, and we'll talk about that in more detail as we go on. Carl Sagan was also there, as was Maurice Strong. His name, I'm sure, will come up more than once this evening. Ted Turner, who I understand helped to MC part of the conference, and also Paul Volcker, formerly of the Federal Reserve. But you get the picture. Some very influential people attended this World Government Planning session, and Gorbachev was very emphatic and very open about his plans at the conference. There was really not too much reading in between the lines that had to be done to find out what this was really all about. I'd like to read to you now a couple of quotes, and I have to admit I couldn't get everything he said down by pencil. I had a microcassette I had tucked away in my pocket, and they took it at the door, and so I figured on that. And so in my other pocket I had this 4x6 pad of paper with my mechanical pencil, and I pulled that out, and I was the only person around that was writing feverishly through the whole thing, looking down, and it caused him, at least on 2 or 3 occasions, we made direct eye contact with each other, because I'm sure he saw me right in front of him taking all these notes. Some of it, however, is paraphrased because I couldn't get the exact wording, and I will let you know whenever that is the case. Now, this was just this week that he made these statements, October 8th of 1996. First of all, you need to know that he helped to found the Green Cross International organization, which is very active at the forefront of the environmental movement, arguing that we need a world government to bring about change and progress in the environment to solve the crisis. So you need to be aware of that. And you also need to be aware that much of the funding for this is coming right out of my hometown of Indianapolis. I did not know that. I'd been told that, but I actually heard it from their lips the other night when I was there. Gorbachev stated, quote, "We need a new paradigm of development in which the environment will be a priority. World civilization as we know it will soon end. We have very little time and we must act." He then favorably quoted Hazel Henderson, an American scientist associated with the Club of Rome, and also spoke favorably of the Club of Rome. Those of you who have done research are aware of the significance of that organization. In fact, they introduced the map that was on page 42 of my book, En Route to Global Occupation, that shows how the world has already been divided into 10 geopolitical regions for the purpose of moving us into world government. They are proposing that the world government be administrated based upon 10 global regions. That is the Club of Rome that came out with that plan. And Gorbachev thinks they are just the greatest thing, and praised their efforts. Then he went on to say, and I quote again, "If we can address the environment problem, we have hope. But it will have to be done within a new system, a new paradigm." He then talked about the need for sustainable development, the need for global environmental security. He said, quote, "We have to change our mindset, the way humankind views the world." Then he went on to praise Greenpeace and World Wildlife Fund as being great organizations supporting this effort, but went on to say that he viewed Green Cross International as the lead organization in bringing about global change, quote, to help develop a new global consciousness. He then went on to call, quote, for a change in our current values. He said that since environmental problems are of a global nature, we have joined forces with, and then I lost him on the quote because he went so fast, but he named an organization founded by Maurice Strong and stated that he was cooperating closely with that organization and Maurice Strong. He then went on to state that the year 1998 would be very important because they would move forward very rapidly from that point in time. And he didn't use the words going public, but that is the picture that it painted, that in 1998 they wanted to go public with this endeavor and begin their final push. And then he stated, and I quote, "By the year 2002, we will be presenting the final draft of the Earth Charter," end quote, which is a type of Bill of Rights for the citizens of the world under a world government. He wants to have it in its final form approved at that time. So if he is correct, the world government would have been launched or would be launched officially around that point in time. This is only a few years away. He then went on to praise Senator Mitchell and Al Gore, the only two political candidates in the United States that he spoke very highly of. And then he said that he was working with UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, to introduce new education curriculums in all countries with a heavy flavoring of the environment and what young people needed to do regarding the environment. He then went on to say the main work is still ahead of us. And then he quoted himself speaking at an earlier conference, and this is what he said about his own words. Quote, "I said very candidly, very frankly, I don't believe the world will support isolationism and the U.S. as a type of international police force." But then he went on to state his belief that together with his efforts and the efforts of other countries, the United States can play an important role in helping to establish the new international order. Those were his exact words. So those are just a few of the things he stated, but I think it gives you a better idea of where he's coming from and what he's trying to accomplish. But I'm sure there are some people here this evening who are skeptical, maybe some people that are heavily involved in the environmental movement. And by the way, we don't mean to advocate or suggest this evening that there are no problems with the environment. We're aware that there are environmental problems, and we need to take care and be good stewards of the world that God has given to us. But I don't believe we have to have a world government to solve the environmental crisis. That is where manipulation is coming in, and I believe everything is being blown out of proportion, and they're proposing world government as the only solution to this alleged environmental crisis. And when you see where Mikhail Gorbachev really comes from in some of his quotes, I think you begin to get the impression that this is a big illusion or deception. A few years ago, in 1987, Gorbachev made the following statement in a speech before the Politburo. Now, you need to be aware of the fact that perestroika and glasnost, for the most part, was still future tense at this point in time when he made the statement. I quote him directly. "Gentlemen, comrades, do not be concerned about all you will hear about glasnost and perestroika and democracy in the coming years. These are primarily for outward consumption. There will be no significant internal change within the Soviet Union other than for cosmetic purposes. Our purpose is to disarm the Americans and let them fall asleep. We want to accomplish three things. We want the Americans to withdraw conventional forces from Europe. We want them to withdraw nuclear forces from Europe. And we want the Americans to stop proceeding with strategic defense initiative." End quote. A lot of people are not aware of the fact that Gorbachev grew up in a Russian Orthodox home, but rejected Christianity at age 21 when he joined the Communist Party and began full-time work in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Many people are also not aware of the fact that he was handpicked and chosen and groomed by Yuri Andropov, former KGB head, and for a short time he was the Prime Minister of the Soviet Union. In addition to this, Gorbachev has a terrible track record on the environment. So for him to be possibly the top spokesperson in the world on behalf of the environment, you know, when you look at Chernobyl and how all of that was handled, and that's just the beginning. If you look at the record of Russia, the Soviet Union, and what Gorbachev did during the years when he was in power, even before 1987, when he had significant power and influence through some of the positions he held, he does not have a favorable track record on the environment. So I hope people see through that as well. In fact, if our leaders in this country had the same track record, they probably would have been impeached by now. And that doesn't sound like a bad idea anyway. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. But anyway, in addition to his endeavors on the environment, Gorbachev has already formally proposed a world tax. This took place approximately 2 years ago. We have his proposal on the letterhead from the Gorbachev Foundation. And if you haven't heard, his foundation, which is headquartered in San Francisco at a former U.S. military base. Now, there's one for you. Think about it. If I would have stood here 6 or 7 years ago and told you that in 1996, the former leader of the former Soviet Union would be headquartered at a former U.S. military base in San Francisco, and that he would be gallivanting around this country and around the world, openly calling for world government and receive standing ovations wherever he went, as he did the other night in Indianapolis, admit, you would have all thought, Ka, you are crazy. There's no way that will happen, but it's happened. And some of us are now referring to his headquarters in San Francisco, the Presidio, as the White House on the West Coast because of all the information that is coming out of there. But Gorbachev unveiled something called the New Global Security Program, which is actually a proposal for a world tax. And he unveiled that program in a speech hosted by the New York Council on Foreign Relations. And it tells us so right on the front page of this letter. And I'm going to quote to you just briefly from this letter in Gorbachev's own words what this world tax has to do with. He says, effective measures are essential for restricting transfers, stockpiling, and production of conventional arms through the establishment of an international authority and the imposition of a tax on their production and sale. The proceeds of the tax should go to the United Nations and, where appropriate, to regional security organizations for their peacekeeping operations, end quote. And then he goes on to list several new organizations that are to be created under the United Nations, funded through this tax, a tax basically placed on our U.S. defense production. So our taxpayer money is already going, of course, to our national defense, and he wants to put an additional tax on that tax that would go directly to empower the United Nations. Also, on page 2 of this letter, it says, and I quote, Mikhail Gorbachev presented the final report of the groundbreaking project to 300 distinguished members of the New York Council on Foreign Relations. David Rockefeller, Sr., founder of the council, introduced Mr. Gorbachev, end quote. And I might add, gave him their stamp of approval on this. For those of you who don't know, the Council on Foreign Relations, more than any other organization, was responsible for the founding of the United Nations. That is why some of our leaders, such as Bush in the past and President Clinton, who are members or have been members of the Council on Foreign Relations, are so into empowering the United Nations and making it more and more powerful, because they belong to the organization that actually helped to create the United Nations. So once you know that, it begins to make sense. But Gorbachev has received their support. And then a short time after he made that proposal, according to the Washington Times of January 16, 1996, Boutros Ghali went public with a proposal for a world tax. The article is titled, UN Considers Imposing Taxes. Now, we figured out that if Boutros Ghali and Gorbachev and a gentleman by the last name of Tobin, I can't recall his first name, but if they all have their way on a world tax, the funding for the United Nations through this world tax would increase by somewhere between 30 and 150 times. Not 30 to 150%, 30 to 150 times the current level of funding. So the next logical question that all of us have a right to ask is, what in the world are they going to do with all that money? And the answer, I think, is pretty obvious. They're going to make their organization larger, they're going to give it more teeth, they're going to add new agencies and bureaucracies, and we, the people of the world, specifically the people of the United States, are going to foot the bill for this if they have their way. They want to start the tax right here in the United States, and eventually it would be a global tax going all around the country. Now, if you think this sounds far-fetched and doesn't stand a chance, consider the fact that the lobbying effort in Congress for a world tax has already begun. And they didn't even wait until after elections to start it. May 18th of 1995, the first letter that I'm aware of went out to members of Congress and top members of the Clinton administration on a letterhead from the World Federalist Association. And this organization states, the World Federalist Association, led by former Congressman and 1980 independent U.S. presidential candidate John Anderson, works to transform the UN into an empowered democratic world federation. Walter Cronkite has endorsed our campaign for global change. Deputy Secretary of State Strobe Talbot endorsed World Federation in a 1992 Time essay, for which he received our annual Global Governance Award in 1993. Then he goes on to name Senator Claiborne Pell, Senator John Kerry, and Congressman Jim Leach, all as examples of people who are supportive of their endeavors. The attitude, the prevailing attitude at the United Nations right now may best be summed up in the following statement, which is a direct quote. This statement was made to a friend of mine in May of 1993 at an Earth Summit in Louisville, Kentucky. And the gentleman who made the statement is Pragati Pascali, who is an officer with the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. He stated, I quote, "Everything is in place for the world government. The U.S. is the only country left holding everything up. The U.S. government is for it. What's wrong with the people?" End quote. And I might add to that statement. You see what's going on in Israel right now? Benjamin Netanyahu wants to defend Israel's national sovereignty. He doesn't want to be told what to do by the United Nations, and look at the heat that he is taking from the international media. I believe Netanyahu and many people from this country and from Israel are the people that are exposing this. In fact, we've been in touch regularly with some friends in Israel that are letting us know what's going on over there, and it's amazing the parallel of what's going on over there compared to what's going on in this country right now, the struggle over our national sovereignty and maintaining our freedoms. Well, if you wonder where the President stands on this, we're fortunate enough to have a letter on White House stationery dated June 22nd, 1993, from President Bill Clinton. Now, I want to make a comment this evening. I don't want anyone in any way to misconstrue what I'm saying this evening to mean that I am anti-government. The Lord knows without any government there would be anarchy. I am in favor of a good, strong central government. What I am opposed to is corruption in government, and I think we all would agree on that. And the current administration has more than its fair share of that. This letter was written by Bill Clinton to his good friend Strobe Talbott, because Strobe Talbott received a special award from the World Federalist Association, which they give out to one person each year who, in their opinion, has done more than anyone else during the previous year to help bring about world government. And in 1993, that person was Strobe Talbott. Strobe Talbott also happens to be a very close friend of President Bill Clinton. They were Rhodes Scholar roommates together. So President Clinton wrote this letter to Strobe Talbott. I quote, "Greetings to the members of the World Federalist Association of Washington gathered for the presentation of the annual Norman Cousins Global Governance Award. I am pleased to extend warmest congratulations to my good friend Strobe Talbott on receiving this distinguished award." Listen carefully. Norman Cousins worked for world peace and world government. End quote. In other words, President Clinton is declaring his understanding and awareness about this matter, that there is in fact an effort underway toward world government, and that this award is being given to Strobe Talbott because of his involvement in moving us in that direction, and acknowledges the fact that he understands why the award was named after Norman Cousins, who until he died recently was one of the biggest New Agers and One Worlders in the world. He goes on to say, it's because of Strobe's knowledge and experience in global affairs that I appointed him ambassador at large responsible for conducting economic aid for the former Soviet Union. I know he will serve our country well and that he will be a worthy recipient of the Norman Cousins Global Governance Award. Best wishes for an enjoyable reception and for future success. Bill Clinton. Doesn't stop there. A couple of weeks ago we got some new documentation, very interesting. You probably didn't know you were going to hear about UFOs tonight, but I told you we'd cover a lot of ground. We got this article from UFO Magazine published by Quest Publications in the United Kingdom. And the title of the article is Rockefeller-Financed UFO Report Sent to World Leaders. And it says, in recent years, 85-year-old philanthropist Lawrence Rockefeller has given financial support to a number of prominent researchers of UFO and alien phenomena. It says, now Rockefeller has financed the creation of a 169-page document intended to present the best available evidence on UFOs to a very select audience. Heads of state and other key world figures who may be almost entirely ignorant of the evidence, but who could, if sufficiently moved, very quickly undo the atmosphere of secrecy that has surrounded this subject for decades. Reportedly, only 1,000 copies of the special briefing were printed, and it will not be offered for sale. Distribution began in earnest during early April of this year, and so far, no feedback from high-ranking recipients has been reported. Well, we need to change that. What a lot of people are not aware of is that Lawrence Rockefeller and the family ranch of the Rockefeller family is in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. If you wonder why President Clinton keeps going to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, you've heard that a lot in the news. That's why. He has met with Lawrence Rockefeller directly, personally, and Rockefeller has tried to sell Clinton on the existence of extraterrestrials and aliens and UFOs, and has been trying to get him to promote this idea and to talk about it. And of course we saw the effects of that in August, where he publicly came out and talked about the possibility of life on Mars, which is now already being passed off as if it were a fact. Come on, people. A rock lands on the Earth 2 billion years ago, and we know for sure that it came from Mars, and because there are a few strange configurations on it, we know now that there is life on Mars. Who would have thought it? That in 1996, the United States President, possibly, arguably, the most powerful person in the world as head of the United States, although we all understand there are people more powerful behind the scenes, but standing up and talking to people of the world about life on Mars after talking to Lawrence Rockefeller. Rockefeller is very interested in spirituality, occult spirituality. The article said he's also interested in the whole area of spirituality. Mr. Rockefeller majored in philosophy at Princeton. So I just wanted you to be aware of some of the types of people that are having an influence on the president right now. And it's really sad. It's not funny at all. I kind of make light of it. And the Lord gave my wife and I a sense of humor, without which we wouldn't have made it this far. But sometimes you have to laugh because these people, thinking they're going to form a world government and somehow reject all the principles of God in the process. And that's what this world government movement is all about. Rather than accepting Jesus Christ and his teachings, which if accepted, we would have world peace and world unity and harmony. However, that has been rejected, and so now these people are trying to create a utopia within their own power, and they believe we have to have a world government to bring about world peace. It's as a direct reaction to the rejection of the teachings of Jesus Christ. And now they're talking about alien beings and spirit guides and all kinds of stuff. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get into that in a moment. But I want to make a transition now from the political and economic toward the spiritual. This document we have here came from Uniting Spirits. That's the name of the organization, out of Kansas City, Missouri. And it states, beginning June 8th, 1996, there will be 4 music festivals in New York, San Francisco, New Orleans, and Minneapolis. These festivals will kick off 4 walks leading into Chicago for the 1996 Democratic Convention. There, the Festival for Life will greet us with a music festival, drum circles, tribal council, and prayer circles. Uniting Spirit's goal is to raise universal consciousness on our planet. In order to create change, we need to come together as one. This all sounds good, doesn't it? This walk represents people from all directions, all colors, and all paths, uniting to heal ourselves and the Mother Earth. This journey begins from within yourselves. People are very supportive of President Bill Clinton. As I have said several times already, there is a spiritual undertow to this movement. Along with the environment, this is being seen now in the area of public education. How many of you, I'm just curious, have heard of the World Core Curriculum? A number of you have. The World Core Curriculum set forth the principles for the future of public education in the world over the next couple of decades, not just for this country, but for the whole world. It was drafted by Robert Mueller, who at the time was Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations. And he is also on the New Age lecture circuit. He's well known among New Agers all around the country. In fact, he has spoken here in Seattle. He was here at the same time I was here last time. On the preface page of this World Core Curriculum, which is going to influence our children all around the world, it's been endorsed by the United Nations. In fact, Mueller received a UN prize for drafting this. You need to be aware of this. And it was drafted in the early 1980s. This is what the preface of the World Core Curriculum states. Listen carefully. The underlying philosophy upon which the Robert Mueller School is based, I forgot to tell you, he has his own school called the School for Ageless Wisdom, headquartered in Texas. That ought to send up a flag right there. It says, the underlying philosophy upon which the Robert Mueller School is based will be found in the teachings set forth in the books of Alice Bailey by the Tibetan teacher Djwhal Khul, published by Lucis Publishing Company. Now let's stop right there and dissect this. Some of you already know who Alice Bailey is. She's been called the mother guru of the New Age movement. She wrote over 10,000 pages of information that appeared in over a dozen books. And according to her husband, she would go into a room and sometimes come out several days later with a 500 or 600 page book because allegedly she was a trance channeler. And she'd go into an altered state of consciousness or a trance, and allegedly the spirit guide would dictate through her. Now we can either call her a liar and say she made all this up, which is bad enough because it means that the future global education is based upon a big lie of some lady that claims she heard from her spirit guide, or she's telling the truth, which is even worse in this case because it means this woman is directly in touch with demonic entities and that the future of global education is headed in this direction. If you doubt that, you need to be aware of the fact that Alice Bailey founded Lucifer Publishing Company in 1922, changed the name 2 years later to Lucis Trust. 2 weeks ago, we finally obtained direct, first-hand documentation to show that Lucifer Publishing Company actually existed under that name. We had it second-hand until now from a good source, but now we can prove it. A friend of mine in Kansas City obtained a copy of one of her first books from 1922, 1923, that actually had the date written on it, and it says Lucifer Publishing Company. In fact, that picture was reproduced in our most recent issue of the newsletter focusing on the environment, so you can see the evidence for yourself. And Dwal Kuhl, this guy that she names, in fact, his name appears on some of the books on the front with it. Most people assume that's just a friend of hers. No, it was the name of her alleged spirit guide. Unbelievable. You talk about a good feature story for 2020 or Dateline or 60 Minutes. I challenge all of these news programs. You know, you don't need to come up with sensational stories. The truth is sensational enough as it is. Why are the American people not being told about this incredible deception? And if Christians went out and tried to do something like this and control public education and get endorsements from the UN, the media would be on our tails every single day. But this lady founded Lucifer Publishing Company. We have the documentation, heavily involved in the occult, called for the elimination of many people around the world, if necessary, and yet nothing negative on her. Unbelievable. It really is unbelievable. Since we're talking about spirit guides, I want to talk a little bit more about it, go into a little bit more detail on it. There are a number of different names for these so-called spirit guides. A few of them are Master, Enlightened One, Initiated Adept, Hierarchy of Initiates, Planetary Hierarchy. They're big on the word hierarchy. Übermenschen, which is a German term meaning the super beings, the custodians of the plan, and also the most powerful or highest ranking members of the so-called spiritual hierarchy are oftentimes referred to as the ascended masters or masters of wisdom or simply masters, all these being references to the same thing. What are they? If they exist, and I have talked to people who have been in the New Age movement who have gotten deeply involved in it, beyond just the fringes, who have had some of these experiences, and I believe they were sincere as they shared it with me, that they actually communicated with some of these alleged beings, and I believe, based on their stories and what they believe now, having become Christians, that they are nothing more than fallen angels or demons. And the Bible warns us against spiritism, against opening ourselves up to communicate with the spirit realm. And the way that people do that, open themselves up to the influence of demonic spirits, is to go into an altered state of consciousness or a trance. There are many different ways that can be achieved. I cover a lot of those in my book, The Demonic Roots of Globalism. But just a few of them include centering, yoga, transcendental meditation, hypnosis, mind-altering drugs, programs such as Silva Mind Control, alpha level training, some of the stress management seminars, and some of the techniques learned in martial arts, some of the focusing techniques. You need to be aware of the fact that God, I believe, created the human race with a type of protective shield over them. And I believe when we are born into the world, we are shielded from the realm of the occult. But there are things you can do to tap through that invisible shield, giving Satan a license, in essence, to come through into your life and to do what he wants. And again, that bridge or that opening into the realm of the occult is through going into a trance, an altered state of consciousness. That is the first step towards spiritism. Many Christians do not understand that. It's not being taught in our churches today. Everyone needs to be aware of that. Because some people, I'm convinced, are practicing the occult and don't even realize it. Well-meaning people, but they don't realize that they are opening themselves up to these experiences. And you might not have a strange experience the very first time, but you might if you keep it up for 6 months or a year or longer. And many people do. Too many, I believe, to write this off as a bunch of people fabricating lies about it. Now, who do these alleged spirit guides claim to be? Well, that depends on where you're coming from and how much you're willing to accept. If you are a pantheist who believes in reincarnation, as many New Agers do, you are more than likely going to believe, if you have one of these experiences, that you are communicating with a former human being that once walked the earth, but has now gone through numerous reincarnations, each time evolving higher and higher, to where now they are so advanced that they can communicate to us in ways that we cannot yet understand. If, however, you are an atheist and perhaps you've dabbled with hypnosis and you've inadvertently or purposefully have put yourself into an altered state of consciousness and you suddenly have an experience that you cannot explain, more than likely you're going to believe that extraterrestrials are communicating with you. In fact, do you know, I know through a gentleman, a good friend of mine, who used to work in Dan Quayle's office, that through his contacts in Washington told me a couple of years ago that there are people in NASA and in our U.S. Department of Defense going into altered states of consciousness, allegedly having communications with extraterrestrials. I know that's the ultimate, that's hard to believe, but I'm telling you the truth based on my source, and I believe he's a reliable source. And these people, again, they believe they're simply talking to more advanced beings from another realm that can communicate to us in ways that we cannot yet understand. Now, should we really find this difficult to believe when our president is telling us there's life on Mars because of a rock that landed here 2 billion years ago? I think you're realizing that this deception has gone pretty far, and a lot of people are being roped into it. For those people that come from a Catholic background and maybe inadvertently dabble in the occult, there's a possibility they might believe that they are hearing from Mother Mary or one of her representatives. And if people come from a Protestant heritage, they might just think, if they have one of these experiences, that they are hearing from angels. Have you noticed the craze about angels? You go into any bookstore during Christmas time the last 2 years, a lot of your bestsellers are on angels. Well, there are angels, and they are legitimate angels, and when we pray, God oftentimes sends angels in response. The fact that I'm still alive attests to the fact that there are angels in the world, and that God looks out for us. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But there are also fallen angels. So they might tell you they're angels, and that's a half-truth. They might be, but they're fallen angels. Angels that rebelled along with Lucifer against God. And we're told in the Bible that 1/3 of them rebelled with Lucifer against God and were therefore cast out. And we'd be naive to think that these angels are just flying around with nothing to do. They're engaged in a spiritual battle against us, against our souls, trying to seduce us to go their way. Because Satan knows that his time is short and he wants to take as many people in his direction as he possibly can. I really believe that is what is underneath all of this. That might sound simplified, but I've done years and years of research. I have plenty of documentation to back up my beliefs. If you only give me a chance and think about it yourself and read the Bible and see what it says regarding the last days. Many of the things that are happening today were prophesied in the Bible. And people are surprised about that too, but we really shouldn't be. There are a number of ways in which the New Age movement and its concepts, occultic concepts, are creeping into Christianity. They are trying to put a Christian top-dressing of terminology onto occultic concepts. And angels is one example of that. I already talked about that. Another one is the term meditation. When occultists talk about meditation, they're talking about going into a trance. When the Bible talks about meditation, in the Psalms, for example, King David regularly used that term. He was referring to thinking about, reflecting upon, dwelling upon God's principles and the Word of God. It was an active thought process using logic and reasoning. All the difference in the world. When the One World Movement talks about Christ consciousness, they're not talking about an awareness of Jesus Christ. They're talking about the idea that we can all become Christs. That Christ is simply an office that can be attained. That Buddha attained Christhood, Muhammad attained Christhood, Jesus was a Christ, and we can all become Christ. So you need to be aware of that as well. And the whole concept of global unity is another area where an awful lot of manipulation is going on. You need to be aware of that as well and check some of these organizations out. In fact, John Randolph Price, does that ring a bell with anyone? He organized World Healing Day in 1986, December 31st. It got all kinds of favorable coverage from the media all around this country and around the world. They claimed to have over 100 million people participate in that event, which was supposed to launch a type of final push to bring in the New World Order by the year 2000. They were going to get people around the world meditating at the same moment in time to bring about world peace and world unity. Well, what the media never told us in all the favorable coverage that they gave on this man is that he has written several books, including The Planetary Commission, Practical Spirituality, The Super Beings, to name just a few. And in those books, he makes clear that he has his own personal spirit guide named Asher. I'm serious. It's in black and white in his own books. Now, even if he's not telling the truth, don't you think that's interesting enough that the media will want to tell us about the guy that's really organizing all of this is into spiritism? He has his own personal spirit guide. And just what has his spirit guide been telling him, according to John Randolph Price? This is a direct quote. Asher has told him regarding December 31st of 1986, quote, It will also cause dramatic advances in scientific discoveries, revamp the concept of established religion and church, and serve as a ring of protection for more than 3 billion people. Now, there are over 5 billion people on the planet, but it says it will serve as a ring of protection for 3 billion people. It goes on to say, nature will soon enter her cleansing cycle. Those individuals with their lower vibratory rates will be removed during the next 2 decades, end quote. Then Price states in response, quote, I know that one of the most serious problems we have today is overpopulation. But wiping more than 2 billion people off the face of the earth is a little drastic, don't you think? To which Asher replied, quote, who are we to say that these people did not volunteer to be a part of the destruction and regeneration for the purpose of soul growth, end quote. So they're saying we've got to have global unity and harmony and have a world government, but we've got to get rid of 2 billion people first to accomplish it. This makes Hitler look like a Sunday school teacher. And to think that our media is not aware of this when he's written it in his books and it is so blatant it just jumps out off the pages at you. I hope those of you who are involved in the New Age movement take a second look at what you're really involved in. These are considered the leaders of today's New Age movement, along with Barbara Marx Hubbard, who has made similar statements, and others. And if you're wondering who these people are that are going to disappear or be persecuted and tormented, well, we get a clue in the writings of Alice Bailey. She wrote between World War I and World War II and right after World War II. And so a lot of her comments had to do with that particular world crisis, World War II. And here's a direct quote from Alice Bailey, founder of Lucifer Publishing Company. This world crisis with all its horror and suffering is in the last analysis the result of successful evolutionary processes. She says, to us on the inner side, the World War was in the nature of a major surgical operation made in an effort to save the patient's life. A violent streptococcic germ and infection had menaced the life of humanity. Another surgical operation may be necessary. And she's talking directly here about Old Testament Jews. All the implications are there through her writings. Later on, she also talks about Christians and her idea of them. And she says, it can be expected, this is a quote, it can be expected that Orthodox Christianity will at first reject the theories about the Christ which occultism presents, end quote. In other words, she's admitting here that in the years ahead from when she wrote this, that there would be an effort underway to put a top dressing of Christianity on occultic concepts, and they would try to sell this to the church. And unfortunately, to a large degree, it is working today. Many people, Christians, cannot tell you the difference between occultism and Christianity, and therefore are being drawn into this. You know, I want to make another comment here quickly. If the media is truly concerned about anti-Semitism and anti-Christianity, why don't they go after the one world movement, which is anti-Jewish and anti-Christian to its very core? The fact that they are not doing so tells us that they're not really concerned about anti-Semitism. They're just taking a few people on the fringes, some of the fringes of the militia movement, but by no means a majority of the people, and then with one broad stroke of the brush, they're trying to make every person involved in the militia movement to look out as if though they are anti-Semitic, and then go a step beyond that. Since many of the people in the militia movement are opposed to world government, therefore anyone speaking out against world government and the New Age movement is also anti-Semitic. And guess what? People are buying into that as well. Now, I don't even own a gun, and I'm not a member of any militia group, but I do support the rights of Americans to bear arms. That's a God-given right that was spelled out in detail in our U.S. Constitution. And we are seeing those rights being stripped from us. I'm running out of time. I'm going to try to wrap up very quickly. There are 5 motivating efforts, as best as I can tell, behind the one world movement. One is political. Some of our politicians think that if they help to bring about the one world government, it will guarantee them a key position of leadership in it once it happens. I personally would put Al Gore into that category. A second motivating factor is economics. Some people who are helping to fund this effort with millions of dollars going into it, I think, see themselves sitting on top of the international banking empire that will coexist as part of this world government and will put them in a very powerful position. So I think power and greed has something to do with it. A third motivation is naivety. A lot of well-meaning but incredibly naive people who have not done their research, who really do not know what is behind all of this, who just think world unity and world peace sounds good, so I'm going to go out there and support all these organizations. And if you are one of those people, I hope you will be enlightened by the end of this evening. A fourth motivation, religion. When I'm talking about religion, I'm talking about pantheism, which is the underlying belief system of the New Age movement. Pantheism teaches the idea that there is no personal God creator, but rather God is a force, an impersonal God force, and this force lives in all plants, animals, and human beings. Therefore, we are all part of God, And many of these people, not all of them, but many of them believe that if we help to bring about a world government, at the moment that it actually happens, humanity will take a quantum leap into a higher level of spiritual existence, and that those people who are working on this effort will at that time receive supernatural occult power to be able to do things that they've never dreamed of doing before. And they call this, again, taking the quantum leap into the new age or the new world order or the age of Aquarius. Take your pick. It all means the same thing. There's one more motivation. People that become heavily involved in the occult, if they stay in it long enough, a percentage of those people end up actually worshiping the source of these false teachings, which is none other than Lucifer himself. And they become known as Luciferians. And you see a lot of that throughout the writings of the secret societies. You saw it in the writings of Helena Blavatsky and Alice Bailey and others. And what it comes down to is these people believe that Lucifer is soon to take his seat of power over the world through a person, and through that person will govern over a new age of enlightenment. And Lucifer will come to liberate mankind. One of the slogans is, if we build it, he will come. In other words, if the people of the world put the pieces into place, he, which they call the world teacher, or Maitreya, or the Christ, they use all kinds of different names, that he will come. I believe this is a direct reference to what Scripture would refer to as the Antichrist, or the man of lawlessness. We are headed in that direction very quickly, my friends. And you can choose sides. There's only two. Either go down this path of globalism and world government in the New Age, which ultimately has Lucifer or Satan himself behind it, or follow Jesus Christ, who is the only hope for the world. He's the hope for us physically, because according to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, we know that at his return, he will put a stop to this world system and the man of lawlessness. And the Bible also, through that statement, reveals that we are not going to be able to stop it. We can expose and do everything we can from people getting involved in it, but ultimately it's going to happen, and it'll take the return of Jesus Christ to stop it. That's the physical hope. There's also a spiritual hope, the eternal hope. The fact that if we were to walk out of here and die today, or if we are persecuted and put to death for our faith, that we will be in eternity with Jesus Christ. And that excites me. And that's why I'm able to do what I'm doing without fearing for my life. It's because I have that eternal hope. And I hope that before all of you leave here this evening, that you have your eternity secure as well by having given your heart to Jesus Christ. Thank you very much. God bless you.